people or that teeter on the fringe of accepted healthcare practice. Now, how much influence Kennedy will have in a Donald Trump administration remains unclear, although some are suggesting that he could act as a White House czar for policy over several federal health agencies. And some of Trump's closest allies are privately counseling him to try to block a one-time Republican nemesis from becoming the Senate Majority Leader, pushing him to impose his will more forcefully on an already compliant GOP Congress. Those advisors believe Trump should stop Senator John Thune of South Carolina, the number 2 Republican, from winning the top post. And too many left-leaning Americans, it is resoundingly clear that women who backed Donald Trump in the presidential election voted against their own self-interest. Liberal women in particular have spent recent days practically stunned, stewing over how other women could have rejected Harris, who would have been the first woman to lead the nation in its nearly 250-year history. Instead, they chose a candidate who spews misogyny seemingly with glee, not for the first time, but for the second time. But women themselves are divided in this election. Exit polls show that 45% of female voters cast ballots for Trump, and far more white women voted for Trump than Black women. The compounding rejection of first Hillary Clinton, then Kamala Harris, has exposed an uncomfortable but steady undercurrent of American society. And that is, women do not necessarily agree on what counts as progress or a setback. And the Democrats, after VP Kamala Harris was defeated by Donald Trump, there are questions about who will lead the party and in what direction. This is a hotly debated topic as officials explore what went wrong and forge plans to oppose the upcoming Trump administration. Jockeying has already begun, and not all ambition may be rewarded. Appearing too eager to seize the opportunity presented by the loss of the Democrats could backfire if some Dems are not ready to move forward. But if the period after the 2016 election is any guide, scores of Democratic figures and groups will try to fill the leadership void created as Joe Biden prepares to leave office. And talk about Donald Trump appointments. This week, he appointed Tom Homan as border czar and Stephen Miller as deputy chief of staff, signaling a strong commitment to a hardline anti-immigration agenda. Few countries stand to be more affected than Mexico by what Trump has described as the largest deportation in the history of our country. Nearly half of the estimated 11 million people living illegally in the United States are Mexican. Now, deporting them is cheaper and easier than sending migrants back to more distant countries that are at odds with Washington, such as Venezuela. Well, that's according to Donald Trump and his new border czar. And the Supreme Court today rejected a request by Donald Trump's former White House chief of staff, that is Mark Meadows, to transfer his state case in Georgia to federal court. This is his state election interference case, which is still pending in the state court of Georgia. Other Trump appointments today we're learning include South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem. She will serve as the Homeland Security Secretary. And this is another pick of a loyalist by Donald Trump for a crucial role. This South Carolina governor campaigned heavily for Trump and talked extensively about fortifying the border. And in some good news for Democrats, Ruben Gallego, the Democratic congressman running to replace retiring Senator Kristen Sinema in Arizona, has been projected as the winner by the Associated Press of that very tight Senate race that was not supposed to be so tight. The Democratic candidate had a sizable lead over the Republican, who happens to be a former news anchor and staunch ally of Donald Trump. But with more than 94% of the vote counted as of yesterday, the race has been called for the Democrat. This means that in the U.S. Senate, Democrats will have 47 seats to Republicans 53 seats. This is the news of the day, and this is Areva Martin in real time, and I'm your host, Areva Martin. This is your one-stop destination for today's trending news, expert analysis, and my unfiltered opinions. In this hour, I'm going to be joined by Dr. Larry Walker. He's a professor at the University of Central Florida. Glad to have him back. Haven't had a conversation with him since the election, and a lot happened in these Florida elections. The initiative to enshrine abortion rights got a majority of Floridian voters, but didn't meet the 60% threshold needed in order to pass. So Florida is one of the 10 states that had a abortion initiative on the ballot that decided that it wasn't time to enshrine abortion rights into its constitution. We know Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida campaigned heavily against this initiative, and he and those that didn't want to see it pass were successful, because although states like Missouri, red states like Missouri, did vote in favor of enshrining abortion rights, not so for Florida. So I have lots to talk about with Dr. Walker in terms of the state of Florida and Florida politics. And might Ron DeSantis show up on one of these very rapid lists that are coming out from the Trump campaign? Also, Fatima Gilliam is here. She is an attorney and author of Race Rules, What Your Black Friend Won't Tell You. Fatima and I have had a conversation about this election since we got the news of Donald Trump's win, but we've been having conversations about who is to blame. And if you've read any of the recent political articles, Washington Post, New York Times, any of the articles, and watched any of the cable news, there's a big raging debate. A lot of folks blaming Joe Biden, Kamala Harris. Some folks saying it was because the Democrats were too woke, focused too much on social justice issues. And one of the late night comics has this incredibly funny but real clip where he goes and shows all of the ads that Democrats were running. And there wasn't a single solitary ad on anything that would speak to Democrats being too woke. What he showed were Democrats running ads that talked about the border, ads that talked about the economy, ads that talked about healthcare, all the things that you would expect. Yes, Rob, thank you. That was John Stewart, a really excellent piece, really reminding people not to be, allow themselves to be gaslighted, to let gaslighters, I'll put it like that, impact their thinking on this election. And it's kind of nauseating when you look at some of the analysis that's being done on television as well as in the paper. Folks coming up with weird things saying like Kamala Harris didn't focus enough on the economy. Duh. She rolled out all kinds of economic plans focused on helping middle class and working class people, everything from buying homes to starting businesses, yet they say she didn't focus enough on the economy. Even there's a ad or commentary by some in the news saying that she didn't go on Joe Rogan's podcast, and maybe that was the reason that she didn't win this election. Lots of folks saying Biden got out the race too late. He should have gotten out earlier. We've heard, she lost because they should have held a primary. Someone else said she didn't spend enough time, sharing her, true self, her authentic self. People didn't get a chance to know her. I mean, there's just theory after theory after theory. All of them are ridiculous, because the reality is this was a race about white supremacy, supporting white supremacy, and proximity to white supremacy. And when people talk to me about the economy, I just really want to throw up, because the economy is better right now today than it has ever been. Under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, we've had some of the highest growth in terms of jobs in this country. We've had the lowest Black unemployment rate. We've had low unemployment rates all the way around. Folks who are fortunate enough to be investors and to own stock, the stock market has just been going bananas. All the folks I know with portfolios are talking about how well their portfolios are doing. We know CEOs are making money hand over fist. And Kamala Harris talked about price gouging and the fact that prices are still high on consumer goods, not because inflation is still going up. Inflation, in fact, has gone down and has leveled off, but prices are still high because of price gouging. And she had a plan for price gouging. So that's more gaslighting. When people tell you, this was an election about the economy, that's not true. Well, it's definitely not true if people understand the economy and understand the economy today and the plans that Kamala Harris has or had for even making the economy better. And all of the economists who said that every single plan that Donald Trump has for the economy would in fact tank the economy, would make consumer goods even higher for everyday people, working class people, middle class people. So when people say to you the economy, please ask them to explain and unpack that. Don't just let them get away with that statement, because it is not a substantive statement. It's a Republican talking point. And unfortunately, those on the left in the media have picked up on that talking point. And to say things like she didn't spend enough time talking about the economy. And if you were at any of her rallies, if you heard any of her interviews, she talked incessantly about the economy and making the economy work for everyday people, and what she would do from, home loan assistance programs, again, to those investments into small businesses, $20,000 forgivable loans for men of color. So, I mean, we could just go down the list with all of her economic plans. Just tell people to be real, to be honest, to keep it a buck, keep it 100. If they didn't vote for Kamala Harris, they didn't vote for her because they really, truly didn't believe that this country was ready for a Black woman, for a woman, period, to be president. And they believe that a white man, Donald Trump, with everything, and we've talked about all of his deficits, from being criminally convicted to being adjudicated a rapist. I mean, the list just goes on and on. And then ask them, where was Donald Trump? Where were all these rallies and interviews where he was talking about all these substantive policies? What we saw him do is spew a lot of racist and misogynistic statements, and to degrade and to demean, large demographics of people, from women to immigrants. And so that really just upsets me when people try to blame Kamala Harris. She is not the reason we lost this campaign. Democrats need to face this, and we need to quit telling ourselves, this is not our America. I can't believe this is our America. Well, wake up, people. This is our America. And this is what people wanted. They embraced Donald Trump and everything that comes with him, including Stephen Miller, and Steve Bannon, and all of the other loyalists. So when you see these rollouts of all of these supporters of Donald Trump who are now getting these big time positions, don't be surprised, don't be shocked, because he told you what he was going to do, and now he is doing it. So we'll have a lot to talk about in this hour about the election. And in hour two, we're going to be talking about, we're going to change up a little bit, politics. I know a lot of people want to move on. Unfortunately, we can't just move on, so we're going to have to continue to talk about it. But we can do two things at the same time. We can walk and chew gum. So we're going to talk about in hour two, we're going to talk about sports and how the impact of sports on culture and the commercialization of sports and certain sports figures. Dynamic young woman, Jasmine Maeda, who is a former professional basketball player turned entrepreneur, is going to join me in hour two. And we're going to talk about how this election even may impact what we see in terms of sports. A lot of focus on transgender in sports in this election. So that's what we're going to be talking about in hour two. But just one more clip that if you've seen Jon Stewart, if you haven't, make sure you check it out. But also Google this clip that Don Lemon just posted on social media. And basically now Donald Trump says he wants reparations for white folks. Y'all know I've been working on reparations for people of color, people who are the descendants of chattel slavery, people whose ancestors were enslaved in this country. Donald Trump is not seeking reparations for us or for any of those people. He says that he is going after these big universities. He's going to direct his Department of Justice to file civil rights cases against schools that engage in racial discrimination against white students. He says it's time to put a stop to all this nonsense. Make education work for Americans. He's going to be fining colleges, Dr. Larry Walker, billions of dollars. He says these colleges get from the federal government, and that's going to end under his administration. And if you had any hopes of DEI or any kind of preferences given to people because they're from marginalized backgrounds or communities, it's over. Y'all voted for Donald Trump. This is what he said he would do, and he is doing it in real time. And yes, I said it. Donald Trump says reparations for white folks. When we come forward, more of today's news right here on KBLA Talk 1580. Stay with us. We are back, and Dr. Larry Walker and Fatima Gilliam are joining me. All right, Dr. Walker, I have not seen you since Election Day. It's been a couple of weeks, so I have not gotten your reaction, your response, and just what you're feeling in this moment. So let me have all of that.
Whew, Areva, a week, I still need time to process this. Obviously, like you, I saw your video you posted an hour and a half ago about, you kind of stepping away a little bit to kind of reflect on this and complimenting VP Harris. Areva, and I know we talked about your show. Besides, in a former life, I told you I worked on the Hill, and I don't, no, I don't think I know there are a lot of Americans that voted for Donald Trump that, from a policy standpoint, in terms of impacting your everyday lives, from they don't understand how the federal government works. A majority of Americans don't really have an understanding how federal or state policy works and how government works, but they're about to find out. Whether we're talking about Social Security, whether we're talking about the ridiculous idea that you can pay reparations to a group that has the majority of the wealth in the country and has since its inception, or we talk about Medicare or the Affordable Care Act. When we talk about if you have students in rural communities, all these rural communities that came out overperformed for him, they are going to pay a very steep price. And I think I have to, as most Americans, most Black people, let me be clear, I'm gonna have to figure out a way how to deal with my anger, and not let it become rage, because like as a parent, as someone who lives in a state that is very anti-Black, and then for white women in particular to again not vote in their best interest, as a support of the patriarchy, essentially. And then they do it realizing they will be impacted, but not caring about how Black women, who we know, like unfortunately, suffer more from what we're going to see over the next couple of years. I keep telling people, wait till July of next year, and what you'll see in the first 6 months, you will not recognize the United States, and not even get into issues related to international policy regarding NATO and Russia, and how Ukraine, he's going to force Ukraine to take a bad deal, and then what that means about what Russia could try to do to Poland, and France, Italy, Germany, the UK are not going to simply sit around and let Putin push further west. They're not going to do it. And so we're talking a lot about a lot of the national domestic policies, but internationally, I'd even started talking about Israel. There are going to be some serious long-term implications that many Americans in this country have no idea about.
You are so right. And it's already starting, Fatima. So Donald Trump is out saying, universities, we're not playing games with you. We're about to take that money back. He said, fine universities. So we know they've been chomping at the bit to get to these universities ever since we saw those hearings with Claudine Gay and other professors, ever since we saw those protests. And who he has appointed as the UN ambassador is the New York Congresswoman, who is a hardcore Israel supporter, who was one of the hardest on the Hill, questioning those professors or those presidents when we saw the students protest the Gaza war on those college campuses. Diversity, equity, inclusion is pretty much dead. And Donald Trump says not only is it dead, he wants to go further and give money to white students who he says have been harmed by these policies.
Well, when you started talking about reparations for white people, it just goes back to, I probably mentioned it on your show before, one of my favorite quotes that says, a white identity is a trust fund and its currency is grievance that is stolen from others, right? And that is where we are. White people playing the victim, they played the victim all the way to this election. This is what drove people to come out in droves, right? There are more people that came out to vote for Donald Trump in 2024 than what happened in 2020 right? That happened again in 2016. So his numbers are going up. So his message is resonating with white people who are afraid of a browning of America. And that is why things are under attack. You mentioned Elise Stefanik, who may become the ambassador to the United Nations, which is mind blowing. She got kicked off of a Harvard committee or, some engagement that she was involved in because she was I think potentially, I can't remember, maybe it was an election denier or she said something about January 6th. I can't recall. Either way, she's a dangerous person and she definitely is coming for diversity, equity, and inclusion. She'll make my life and the work that I do significantly harder, but it is going to be extremely challenging for people that work within organizations that value diversity and also understand the business case for diversity and inclusion, because it means that your company is more profitable, that the economy grows, right? That there's more innovation, that you have lower turnover rates with your employees, that if you're in a hedge fund, you're going to have a greater return on investment, which is what you need to drive results for your investors. All of these things are going to come down. And, one thing that I really think that is very unique and special about the United States is that it is a very diverse country. So it is our competitive advantage relative to other countries. And we're about to squander it in terms of economic growth, in terms of innovation, in terms of productivity. So we are engaged in massive self-harm as a country.
Yeah, I wonder, Professor Walker, and I would agree with Fatima under normal circumstances, but I think these companies are about to be so white male, that any notion that women are needed, that people of color are needed, I think people are going to, white men right now, and Latino men who voted for Trump, and men in general that supported him, I think they feel so emboldened in this moment that we're going to see a reversal of so many of those corporate policies, policies definitely at the government. I mean, Trump's going to wipe out every, semblance of anything related to diversity, equity, inclusion at the federal government. He did that when he was in office in 2016. And I'm sure Biden has been spending the last 4 years trying to build back those departments, but they're going to be gone under Trump. So, I mean, we've seen the racist text messages going around to students on campuses about report to your plantation to pick your cotton. I don't know if those are going to be aberrations or those are going to be anomalies. It feels like to me we're going to go through a period where that stuff becomes very normalized.
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point. And several weeks ago, Areva, I was on your show, and I made a comment about kind of a new Jim Crow. I know Michelle Alexander wrote that book, but you and I kind of I kind of contextualized on it by Jim Crow, right? Because obviously we talk about de jure segregation at that time, but I think that certainly as a researcher who writes about racism and U.S. civil rights, we're going to have to come up with a new term for the Black suffering we're going to see over the next several years. Really, we're beyond. And look, it breaks my heart to say it as a Black man, but you and I understand what's coming, and we're seeing a little bit of it in terms of what he talked about reparations with white people, the lies and the blaming of minoritized communities will turn into more violence in our against our communities. But what I'm talking to a lot of Black people, they are through, and whatever may be coming in that regard, members of the Black community are not interested in saying and just absorbing it and just taking it on as it comes.
Well, let me stop you there, Professor Walker. To say that Black people are through, and I've seen a lot of folks on social media saying this, we're done. Don't ask Black people to do anything. There's some funny videos out there, Black women saying we're going to wave goodbye to you, to the immigrants, and etc. But I do want to get both of your take on what does that mean to say we're through? We're going to still be in this country. Oh, we've got a lot to talk about when we come forward on KBLA Talk 58. Stay with us. We're back, and Dr. Larry Walker and Fatima Gilliam are joining me in this hour. And in hour two, Jasmine Maita is going to join us. We'll be talking about sports and culture and the intersection of the two, and how this election might, the outcome of the election anyhow, might impact sports and culture. But Dr. Walker, before the break, you were saying Black folks aren't having it. And I said, I've seen a lot of videos, some very funny, about Black folks putting everybody on notice, from immigrants to white women to young people to old people. Like Black women are tired of carrying the weight for everyone. Some of it more comedy than anything else. But what do you mean when you say we're not having it? Because what choices do we have?
Yeah, and I'm referring to the, without a doubt, the violence we're going to see. I think the text messages are just the tip of the spear. Let me say something though, Areva, as it relates to obviously a lot of Black folks I know are saying, it's a wrap for me, right? Because Black people have been upholding democracy for a very long time. I do not think that we can ignore what's about to happen to undocumented immigrants. And the reason why I don't think that from look, as a Black man, but as a researcher, because anytime groups, particularly you look at the history of authoritarianism, if you ignored what's happening in one group, undoubtedly it's going to trickle down and impact another group. And I know this is hard for Black people to hear, particularly how they know, we talk about undocumented, and there are also a lot of undocumented people who are Black, right? So we just can't simply ignore what's likely to happen. We heard about a lot of the Haitians who were here legally under TPS. Donald Trump said before the election that he was going to remove their TPS status, right? So they're going to be folks who are undocumented and those who are documented, who are here legally, who are going to look like you and I, who are going to face tremendous challenges. And then so we can't just simply turn our back on some of the atrocities, in my opinion, that we're going to witness over the next couple of years. So I said that when I meant specifically was that Black people, I seem as very calm and everyday people. The violence that we're likely to see, I think that white people, when they watch these TV shows, they think the Black folks, even during Jim Crow, just ignored it. But what I'm saying is, particularly now, when this violence undoubtedly takes place in our communities as a result of the federal government, in some cases state government, Black people aren't just simply going to say, well, you know what, we'll just wait till the next election. And that's what worries me, is that Donald Trump's aggression and racial hatred will lead to radicalizing a lot of Black folks in our community, and who are angry. And I talked about anger, not turning the anger really into something else. I worry about some of the people I talk about and the level of anger that they have, and that what that could look like over the next couple of years as we combat some of this violence.
Yeah, Fatima, obviously a lot of jockeying is going on right now in terms of who's going to be the next chair of the DNC and who's going to be the leaders of the party. We got deep benches. We've got a lot of really phenomenal U.S. senators. We got a lot of governors. Governor Walz is going back to Minnesota to be the governor of that state. So not clear who will emerge. We see a lot of folks already positioning themselves to be that leader. But who are the folks you think in this moment we need to lead this party through this period and look deeper at what happened? Because if you go back, my husband and I were talking about this. There have only been so many Democratic presidents in our lifetime. The most of the period of our lives, we've had Republican presidents. That's why I get so angry when people blame this on Kamala Harris. We got a historical issue here, much deeper than this one election.
Well, I think the biggest reason why, there are two main reasons I think why Kamala lost, right? One is white supremacy was on the ballot, so that won. At the same time, voter turnout was low. Lower than it was before. So 81 million people came out and voted for Biden in 2020. And the number, although they're still counting, is about 75 million today. 71 million today. So we're still talking maybe a 9 million voter gap from 2020 to 2024. I think you and I will disagree on this because I'm watching pundits talking about how Kamala ran the best race that she possibly could. And I don't think that's true because she lost. And then there are a lot of factors that go into why she may have lost. But I do think in terms of your core question, where should the party be going? Where the party should be going is starting to listen to people that are not on the center, that are not to the right, because the party keeps moving to the right. And so what ends up happening is people who have more progressive views or traditional Democratic views are getting ignored and marginalized by the party. I mean, for example, I don't think it's beneficial to be out there stumping as your core strategy with Liz Cheney and continuing to chip away at the moderate vote. Meanwhile, you have people that are saying, hey, I'm having a hard time paying my rent. I'm having a hard time paying my student loans. Weren't you going to do something about my student loans? Weren't you going to do something about, the minimum?
Fatima, Joe Biden did a whole lot about people's student loans. He's the only president in our lifetime that had a student loan debt relief program. I just had a friend post on Facebook today that her loan, she just got a letter. It wasn't Donald Trump. It wasn't even Bernie Sanders. You talk about on the left talking about relieving student loan debt. It was Joe Biden and Kamala Harris who did that. So we can give folks credit for what they've done.
No, I don't give them credit for what they promised, right? So did they make some improvements? Yes. Has Biden done more than others? Yes. But did he deliver on what he promised? No. And part of that
is he couldn't deliver. Wait a minute. You can't blame Biden for not delivering on student loan debt.
I can, because to me, it was about the implementation and the rollout. So they took forever to come up with a plan. And then when they finally announced a plan, they showed their hand and then had 6 weeks at least for implementation of what they were announcing. So that gave the other side plenty of time to file whatever briefs. If you're going to drop a plan, then be ready to implement on day one when you're dealing with people that are coming for you at every turn. But we don't have to go deep into the student loan issue. And I know that you and I don't agree. What I do think is that one thing that is not helping the Democratic Party is to continue to move to the center and to continue to move to the right, because it marginalizes people and it impacts turnout for people like me that are on the progressive side, that want to see the party to do more for working people. Even with the minimum wage. Yes, they said during the campaign in 2020 that they were going to increase the minimum wage. They introduced legislation and they couldn't deliver for a whole host of political reasons. But that doesn't matter, because people don't really pay attention to what is happening in politics. We already talked before this evening that people don't understand how government works. What they do know is how their life is experienced on a daily basis. And the way that their life is experienced on a daily basis is a struggle. And the party is not responding to that in ways that are meaningful to drive them to show up and vote. So what I'm saying is that
let me just let Dr. Walker, before we have to go to break, jump in. What do you say to that, Dr. Walker? Yes, Fatima's right. I totally disagree with her. I think the country's telling us, far from being left or moving to more progressive, the party is moving further and further to the right, and Democrats keep burying our heads in the sand about that reality. But I want you to address what she said about the rollout of these plans. I think, again, Biden and Harris are being blamed for something they're not to blame for.
Yes, the Republican Party has created a comprehensive misinformation ecosystem that this election proved that you can't penetrate it with facts. And you add misogyny and racism on top of that, and this is where we are. Look, Reva, I know there's a lot of statistical analysis. Look, I'm someone who looks at data all the time. This is not complicated. This goes back to your original point about white supremacy. It's not that complicated. I know several Black people that had tens of thousands of dollars of student loans forgiven. That debt relief is essentially, it also disproportionately impacts Black people. What the Harris campaign and then Harris were trying to do is, which they never articulated, this is the one critique I had, is they were trying to close the Black-white wealth gap. Her plan about first-time home buyers is really, in my opinion, connected to student loans. Look, the anti-inflation, the Inflation Reduction Act, the infrastructure bill, those all created jobs. There's a reason why unemployment is low, and the reason why April last year, the unemployment rate in the Black community was the lowest in U.S. history. So I heard a lot of this conversation about, I've heard Bernie Sanders say it. He's talking about working class Americans, which he's talking about white working class Americans, obviously. But what we've seen here 4 years ago, when he took over, when Biden-Harris administration took over, we were still in the pandemic. So I think that context matters here, is that what they did is almost impossible. The United States, of all the G8 countries, has the most all their economy. Our economy is doing better than all those other countries. So when you provide context from not only domestically but internationally in terms of what's happening with other economies, the United States is far and beyond doing better than those other nations. But once again, they were not able to penetrate this misinformation ecosystem, and so that is a serious problem the United States is going to have to address, because too many Americans, their perception does not match reality, and we have to do something about that.
Yeah, and the last point I'll make on this whole progressive piece, we saw the progressive movement under Bernie Sanders, and quite frankly, it stunk. The white progressives were horrible. I was at the DNC in 2016. They were horrible. So I don't know, Fatima, if that's the party, if that's the group of people you think Black folks are going to find any allyship with, because they treated Black folks like trash. And if the core issue in this country is race, poor people don't unite with Black folks and vote in ways that are going to advance their lives. They vote for whiteness. And so the progressives that were supporting Bernie Sanders were some of the worst people you ever wanted to see in terms of how they were advancing that agenda. And again, it was a white agenda. It wasn't an agenda that was inclusive of all people. And I'm not saying that was Bernie Sanders' intent, but those were those Bernie bros. I mean, think back to them. They were as bad as a lot of these MAGA voters. And in many ways, if you close your eyes, you wouldn't know the difference between the two. And, obviously a lot of debate to go on, and no perfect answer on either side, no single answer. This is a complex issue. So Fatima, I don't suggest that everything you're saying is wrong. And I don't suggest everything I'm saying is right. This is a very complex issue. It's going to take a lot of time to dig into, and the data. You're right, Dr. Walker. We just don't have enough of it yet. And I hope all the experts are going to take the time that it needs to dig into that data. When we come forward, I want to talk about some of these appointments. Not a lot of surprises, but Donald Trump seemingly has a much better orchestrated campaign this time around than when he was president the first time. What might that mean for the country? Stay with us. KBLA Talk 1580. We're back, and we were talking about the number of votes that Trump and Harris got, and I just went online to check the latest numbers. And Harris is at 72 million votes, which means she got more votes than Hillary Clinton did. Donald Trump is at 75 million, so he still hasn't reached the 81 million that Biden got. Of course, votes are still being, Biden in 2020, that is, still being counted. But also what's remarkable, the 7 battleground states that Trump beat Harris in, we were told that those battleground states were tight, and the numbers bear that out. Like Arizona's not that tight. It's like 47 to 52%. But Georgia, 49 to 51. Michigan, 48 to 50. Nevada, 47 to 51. Pennsylvania, tight, 49 to 50. Wisconsin, very tight, 49 to 50. North Carolina, 48% to 51%. So that blue wall of Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, definitely those were percentage points races. So again, I go back to Kamala Harris ran a hell of a race in 107 days to get 72 million votes and to be as competitive as she was. We have a huge issue, obviously, with the Electoral College. I mean, if you just look at the map, the number of states that are red versus the number of states that are blue in the Electoral College, we whole nother show. But do want to talk about some of these appointments. Marco Rubio, Professor Walker, is looks like he's going to have a job. Kristi Noem from South Dakota has looks like a job. Elise Stefanik, New York. So does it feel like Donald Trump has a much more organized rollout and seems like a more professional campaign perhaps is underway than what we saw 4 years or 8 years ago? 4 years ago.
Yeah, I know that, there's this rollout, and choosing some of these individuals seems that way. But this is, listen, let's be clear about how this can be, the efforts will be coordinated via the White House. Stephen Miller and other individuals will be in terms of, Senator Rubio, and then, maybe Secretary of State Rubio, based on what we hear. It will, he may be the face of diplomacy as it relates to the United States. But we will have some very interesting individuals in the West Wing making decisions about our international policy. When it comes to, Secretary of Homeland Security, you mentioned Noam. I'm still baffled that the election turned out the way it is, and the people we're discussing are going to actually be have prominent positions, particularly Secretary of Homeland Security, who is likely to be the point person on deporting. I don't know, certainly not going to be millions, but maybe hundreds of thousands of individuals. And like I said, I know these are all elected officials we're talking about, but the bottom line is they'll be the face of what will be chaos, in my opinion, in the White House. Particularly considering, I want to make one connection as relates to these individuals we're identifying as kind of the fake, face fronting of the administration, is that whatever decisions these individuals made, Donald Trump will be empowered to give direct orders based on we know what happened in the U.S. Supreme Court and giving him complete immunity. So I don't think any of these, as we talk about some of these individuals who are, like I said, are politicians you see on mainstream and CNN and MSNBC and Fox all the time, I don't think we should be fooled about who's making the decisions in the West Wing.
Oh, no. And I totally
And I'm not saying you are, but I'm just saying.
No, I was just curious. Does it feel like this is a more orderly? I don't know. Donald Trump's last administration was just so chaotic, just felt so amateurish, so just full of chaos. This just feels, not the people. The people are horrible, and we know they're going to be horrible. But just, I don't know, the rollout just feels like to me that he has a more professional operation, that they did learn something before, and perhaps they're trying to implement.
I think we have low expectations. I think the bar is so low for him, though, that anything true. That seems rational, it's like, oh, this seems rational. I think that's in my opinion also, that he just, the expectations are so low for him because it's always so chaotic.
Yeah, no, you're right about that. I did ask Fatima, and I'll ask you, who do you think should be the next DNC chair? You worked in DC, you know what the DNC chair does. Particularly, we're going to have a DNC that doesn't have a White House. So that job, some would say, becomes even more significant because you're trying to build back a party that's out of office. Do you have any favorites for that job?
I'm gonna go. All right. So I think, listen, also the person who runs the DNC, in my opinion, should be a black woman. I'm just gonna put it out there, and I'm gonna go for somebody that is always under, who's a member of Congress. Well, no, I'm not. I'm not gonna go. I'm not gonna go. I'm not gonna go who I'm thinking I'm gonna go with. But let me say, the person should be a black woman because of.
Wait a minute. You can tell us who you're thinking about.
Look, this person's not. They're not gonna do it because they're a member of Congress. But I think somebody from her team should be. Let me put this. Somebody from Lauren Underwood's team should run the DNC. There you go.
Okay. You like Lauren Underwood.
She gets a lot of work done and has a very strong team and is always under the radar. She's on the Appropriations Committee. And I think that somebody from her team should be DNC chair.
Fatima, I would imagine you're thinking of somebody more progressive than Lauren. Who's top of your list?
I can't, point to anyone specific. I mean, it would be great. I think the previous time it should have been Stacey Abrams instead of, Jamie Harrison we have now, because she did so much in terms of delivering Georgia rather. But one thing that I think is really critical, what the party has been doing in the past is not working. So what I want to see happen is not a rinse and repeat of the past. And that is what brings me the most fear, is that that's what's going to happen, right? I mean, even in terms of like how I want us to move more towards the traditional Democratic base and more towards a progressive side. If continuing to move to the right has not delivered for us, then that is something that we need to potentially disrupt and move in a whole new direction. That is what brings me, like I said, the biggest concern. I will also throw this out. Now that Trump has won, do you notice they don't talk about voter fraud anymore? I mean, I will say that, right? Because now the election
was perfect.
And I will say, I have a friend that went to Harvard with me, and she knows that I volunteer with election protection, and she lives overseas. She's born in the United States from Pennsylvania, and her ballot was challenged in Pennsylvania as a not being a legitimate ballot living overseas. And she's a white woman. And as soon as Trump won, the Republican senator in the state of Pennsylvania dropped his case against her. He had filed complaints against her and over 500 other people. And there were similar cases filed challenging ballots in 9 different counties, I think it was, in Pennsylvania. And poof, Trump wins. And of course, all of those cases disappear. So,
there's no voter fraud when you win, right?
Exactly. Right. And I will just say that this administration is an example of how you can just fail up. Because as a white person, because these people, Trump, we know he's not qualified. These people that he's picking, Noam from, the Dakotas. I mean, she's not qualified. Elise Stefanik, how can she be the person that's really going to be the one representing us at the United Nations? Right. I mean, the border guy, he did stuff before. He just wants to deport everyone. So I guess that's his lane, if that's the lane that they're in. But the point is to whether or not they're more organized. I don't know. It was a dumpster fire the last time around. And the bench is probably not as deep for people who are actually very skilled at running the government. The bench will be deep with people who don't understand how the government works and have crazy plans. But the problem is they're going to get away with their crazy plans.
Yeah, no, Trump has made it clear this is not the party for those what he called deep state types. This is the administration of loyalists. So if you were loyal, you are getting a job. Doesn't matter if you're competent or capable of doing the job, as long as you kiss the ring. We are out of time. Thank you, Dr. Walker. Thank you, Fatima. Always a pleasure to be in conversation with both of you. When we come forward, we're going to be talking about sports and cultures. Stick around. KBLA Talk 1580.
All right, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Hey, Marty.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Have a good one.